and welcome to Chai. On today's episode, we're talking about human resources. I've got here Angela Radcliffe with me, my co-host. We will put everyone's link in the comment section as usual. And our resident AI expert at Mobius and AI professor at a university is backstage, Nima Azarain. Our guest today is Dustin Sandoval. Dustin, say hi.
Hey, how's it going?
That's all Dustin has to say. I'll say a couple of things about him. Dustin has been in the talent and HR industry for almost 20 years. Under his leadership, different organizations and teams that have worked for him has placed over 250,000 jobs in the US. So he knows a little thing about finding talent and connecting them to organizations. Now today's conversation is about human resources and the impact of AI to human resources. Obviously, this is a hot topic. Everything from generated resumes to biases in matching, also to what is the future of work. I would love to know what is the future of HR in the face of healthcare. I would like to know what's the future of HR in the face of AI. So, as usual, we've got our opinion spectrum. We know that there are optimistic views on AI, realistic views on AI, pessimistic views on AI, evangelists, and everyone who knows by now, my favorites are the alarmists. And the way we drive this show is we try to focus right here in the middle between the realists and the optimistic perspective to make sure that we can add some value to you, the audience. So, Chai, this is our Chai. And we're talking about HR today. Dustin, for you, and I'm just going to call this a three-legged stool. The candidate, the matching of the candidate, and to the role. You've placed over 250,000 people throughout a 20-year career. Which one of these three boxes is the most exciting thing for you as you think about HR and artificial intelligence right now?
Well, I think they all three go hand in hand. So that piece is super interesting. I think when you're working with any type of professional in the space, either on the job seeker side or on the client side to get candidates, you're always looking for the best fit for the role. The challenge becomes a lot of job descriptions are recycled, reused, not relevant. Key things that the hiring manager or team may be looking for aren't even conveyed. So as somebody who has the opportunity to sit down with the hiring manager, understand the company, understand the culture, and really get into exactly what they're looking for, that provides a huge advantage, step one. But not only that, step two, from the candidate's perspective, to be able to understand, what are the key attributes for the hiring manager and the team, be able to self-select out if they're not interested, and then be able to be guided and coached on what to prepare for, as opposed to just showing up to an interview completely blind, is certainly huge value add for both the client and the job seeker.
So you said something interesting just now that I was not aware of. You're saying that a lot of job descriptions are really copy and paste from other job descriptions and they're not really fine-tuned to the actual role. I didn't realize that as before, but now that you say that, that kind of makes sense. I think I am guilty of copying one job description and saving it at something else and changing a couple of words. And so, if you think about artificial intelligence and what it can do for a particular function in an organization, is that it can really automate some of the stuff that was either mundane or boring or you're not interested in doing. So you could see something like generative right now where you just put in a couple of sentences about what you're looking for, put in a couple of sentences that are non-negotiable about the organization, about the culture, and then generate something that is absolutely beautiful for a job description perspective. But with the same token, you could almost see a candidate take a job description, push it into a large language model, and then kick out the most perfect resume that matches exactly what that job description looks for. How does that differ from what happens today, which is people have 7, 8, 9 versions of their resume, and you kind of tune it to the job that you're looking for? Does that scale and automation introduce more efficiency in the system, or more what I would consider to be over description of oneself?
Yeah, so it's a good point, and I think one of the ways to look at it is the times where you potentially recycle the job description, right? We are all guilty of it. I can think of a personal example where I have hired, 10, 20, 30 account managers, recruiters in my career. And then when somebody asked me for the job description, I didn't have it, right? And I was going through looking for old job descriptions and I found something and it was 70 to 80%. But at that time, I was like, whatever, it's fine. I know what I'm looking for. I'll just send it out. That was my personal experience. However, I feel that that is a somewhat similar experience for every hiring manager changing the job skill set to front-end engineer or project manager or what have you. I have already seen the benefit of, on the client side, working with a consulting firm who knew what they needed in broad strokes, but not details. So we don't have a job description, but what we're looking for is, somebody who's got experience going from on-prem to a cloud database, somebody with financial services experience, and then somebody that has, a specific domain experience. You can type those keywords into a chat GPT or another LLM, and then get a job description, go back to that hiring manager and say, this is what we've come up with. Is this understanding, right or not? And where can we go and elaborate? So you can essentially give them the blueprint and then tweak in the details, which is very, very helpful, I think, for both the client and the person who's reaching out and seeking a job. I think you bring up an interesting point on the job seeker piece and the motivation or opportunity to have a very, very tailored resume that's not necessarily accurate.
Yep.
I think that's certainly going to be something we're going to see more and more of, as you can obviously tailor a resume, custom tailor a resume within seconds.
Or you could be one of those people who have a real challenge translating your experience on paper, and the algorithms have been against you for years. I'm a great example, right? No university degree. Let me tell you, every time that resume has been out of the pile, right? So if there was some bias working against you in the past, that maybe now you can get really good at getting to the top of the pile and then speaking for yourself in that interview. So it is a really interesting thing. You said earlier, that there is a nuance that goes into getting 250,000 people. I mean, we're talking 250,000 people you've helped get into roles. That probably took place over conversations. You got to know them. You understood the culture fit on the other side. Do you think that can be replicated with AI tools?
I want to punt that question at Nima. So Nima and I have this belief that at some point, an AI is going to spend so much time with me, and after a 10-year relationship, it might be able to speak on my behalf. Now, I'm a little bit more bullish. I think it'll take about 2 years. Nima, tell us about the state of the technology to be able to train a model to replicate my voice, replicate my style of speaking, and replicate my presence to a point where, from an HR perspective, you might be able to get a first interview with someone's digital self as opposed to them. In both ways, right? From a candidate perspective, as well as I'm interviewing the organization at the same time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Richie. That's a good question. Honestly, I think in general, right now, that is possible. Like, it's just a matter of the cost. It's just a matter of the effort that you have to put in to achieve something like that. Let me give you an example that kind of relates to our conversation here. Right now, the example that we had from Dustin was using ChatGPT, a large language model, to create a job description or a vacancy description or something like that. But that is a large language model that is optimized to talk and understand the language. And that's a good thing that it can do such a thing. But imagine what a easier tool it would be if you focus the energy of that language model to be only on writing a good vacancy description, good job description, or good resume. And by the way, also those tools exist. So the matter of how much costly it is, how efficient it is, and these are the things that are going to do. going to make the difference? So to answer your question, I think we are yet too far away from understanding what actually makes me talk, what actually makes me say things, not how I talk and how I say things. So, for example, if I am using certain phrase a lot, or you most probably heard, or our viewer know that I use in general a lot. So, yeah, there is going to be a model that can mimic me. There is going to be a model that can look like me, or we have had deep fakes for years now, and they're getting better and better. But what we will not have is an insecurity that makes me say something in certain way.
Right.
So that is something that is going to be the whole spirit of what is going to create the second me.
Yeah, I love your point about confidence and insecurity, and it can be replicated. And if you were hiring someone and you had an opportunity to interview their digital self, instead of booking time, there was a place where you could go to the digital self of candidate A or candidate B and have a conversation with them. Tell me about cultural readiness. Are we are we ready for that?
Is that a joke, Richie? Cultural readiness. Wow. No, I think at the enterprise level, we're still having conversations about which technology might be better to help us just match talent to the skills internally for upskilling, right? So we're like, oh, can Workday do this? Can Eightfold do this? How do we get a little more efficient at combing through the talent to find the talent instead of truly focusing on what do we need to be doing in our organizations to get ready for looking for talent in a completely new way? Because this is a step change. This is not, this generative AI is not going to hit any industry in a small way. So I don't think the conversation's even happening right now.
Yeah. Dustin, you and I had worked on something before where you shared with me that there are certain practices now in organizations where you don't want a person's picture on a resume because that could potentially drive bias. In a world where, let's assume that sometime in the next decade, one's digital self will be representative enough to have a first interview conversation with them, what's going to have to change from the world that we're in today, where I can't have a picture on my resume, to a world where you can learn everything about me by just hitting a link?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and not to punt on that, but I think that those typically go to more HR and legal discriminatory type lawsuits than the actual practicality or ability to do it effectively. But you are absolutely right that there is a very cautious space to not have your picture on a resume or to have anything that could be considered bias. I've even been advised in some cases on the other extreme of not even going to the person's LinkedIn profile after you receive the resume, because you can confirm, if one really wanted to, that you had viewed the profile and saw the picture before making a decision to interview that person or not. So again, more legal than anything on that, but it certainly exists. But one thing, if I could, you wanted to hit on something that Angela said in terms of being passed over for certain jobs because there just wasn't the right qualifying technology or skill set. I think the other thing that we've seen, that's certainly true, but then also, a lot of times some of the best professionals in the world, where you're a high-level software engineer or a strong whatever, insert your skill set here, doesn't make you a great resume writer. And the ability for someone just to pass on something because their resume or their LinkedIn profile isn't up to standards, those types of things happen all the time. I do feel that that's one thing that the AI will get better and certainly assist, but I don't think it will ever fully replace the trust that you have with a staffing provider, a consulting provider, to say, I can validate this person's work. I've worked with them for years. I know the resume is light. I know the profile is light, but give this person a chance, versus the scenario where that person just get passed over from an interview because their resume may be light.
Yeah. HR is a little bit more than the candidate, the matching, and the role. I want to change topics for a second and talk about onboarding and training. I find that the quality of someone's performance in an organization is a combination of multiple things. One of those things is finding the right person. One of those things is giving that person proper onboarding and proper training, an area which lacks as equally as much as the mapping. And that's just because there's a lot of information in organizations. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of know-how that's locked up in documents, policies, intranet sites, emails, wikis, and other things. This idea that we can move to a place where onboarding and training is now augmented by AI. Anyone seen examples of that? And whether you've seen examples or not, what do we think about it?
Well, Richie, from I think at least more than a decade, there has been like efforts in this regard. We know about the knowledge management systems.
Right.
Organizations have been trying to like keep everything in a bucket so that they can easily onboard. We have had different methodologies for managing projects and stuff so that they can somehow easily onboard and ease new employees, new candidates into the role that they are being selected for. But I am not aware if there is an AI tool necessarily to do that. But since the data is now gathered, especially in expert systems and knowledge management systems, it would be a very easy thing to do to couple them with a language model and then let them train people on new domain, which is kind of exciting.
Angela,
Well,
Dustin?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually one of the most exciting areas in this space because let's face it, 90% of corporate training, like in one ear, out the other, and especially some of the most critical stuff, right? Because you get onboarded, you're dumped this ton of information, and then you go about learning your job and your culture and your people, and you go do your job. And then you're like, oh yeah, what was in that SOP that I had to be trained on way back when? And I think what's really interesting about this is this new world is teaching us how to ask questions. We have to learn how to prompt and ask the right questions to get the answers that we want. So wouldn't it be amazing if training and onboarding became only a real-time experience and we learned how to teach people how to ask the right questions so in the moment they get the information they need to serve them the best? I would love to see that be sort of the revolution that comes out of training and onboarding.
Dustin,
Totally
to
agree.
me, this is not just onboarding and training. This is a co-pilot from day one forever.
Totally agree. I think you'll see many new job titles created out of the AI world, but one of the ones that I foresee all of us seeing is something to the extent of a chief remote officer or a chief onboarding remote officer, which is somewhere between a COO and a CHRO. If you think about it, the majority of us were forced into remote work with COVID-19, but we're also using the in-office playbook, just trying to apply it remotely. I don't think that there's a ton of companies who have made the commitment to the new style of onboarding. Yes, some people are fully remote. Yes, some people are in office. Yes, some people are hybrid. But most of the people, at least from what I've seen, and the companies that they're looking at, they're taking the old in-office playbook and just applying it online and remote. And a few basic changes and upgrades. I love the comment about prompting correctly and being able to get the information you're seeking, but also just general business etiquette, company culture items. We're seeing companies that are traditionally business professional or suits in office, but there's no etiquette, or at least it's not conveyed correctly to people who are on a Zoom call in a t-shirt or wearing a hat or don't have the proper company background, or a company that doesn't invest in various Zoom and other type backgrounds. So I do see that whole future being a large contributor as we move forward to a more integrated remote hybrid onboarding model.
Richie, you've been in huge enterprises in multiple industries and in startups, including some of your own. What does this look like for you differently?
Well, I just think that there's so much information that is hidden that can now become seen and in the light. I look at the amount of times that I have to call someone to ask them a question, or to send someone a Slack message to ask them a question, whether it's about a rule or a policy that we have, or whether it's some sort of information seeking, where I would much rather talk to the corpus of information that makes up the organization than one individual. Because more than likely that one individual is giving me a single perspective, and I do appreciate the expertise that I can get from one individual, but I'd also want to look, I would want to speak to the corpus of the organization at the same time. I actually see one of the things here is that onboarding becomes a continuous sort of experience, right? As we think past onboarding, one of the other things that I think actually matters in HR is alignment of the entire organization. HR has many different important roles, but I think one of the strategic roles that HR really drives, and this is through leadership development, through communications, is the alignment of the organization. Today, if you think about an organization that has 100,000 people working in it, a very small percentage of that organization is aligned to the top three things that the CEO cares about. And that's just because we're humans, right? We have opinions, we have desires. A lot of times those matter, but alignment is really hard for us. And work is not like the military. The command and control systems just don't apply. And so I think information augmentation can drive alignment way better than it actually operates right now. I'd love to hear ideas on how you think artificial intelligence, images, videos that are generated that are personalized to a particular department to further align them to a top goal. How does that shape the future of work?
Yeah, and I'd love to speak on this a little bit. And I think that there's different companies that are further along and can claim a little bit more than others, but I've seen some demos of AI integrated technologies that can go on top of a CRM. So it goes on top of the Salesforce and essentially will act as a personalized assistant to the top producer in your organization. So if you are in business development and you're going through it, it will say, John Smith, the top rep in this company, at this point would send an email to the prospect with collateral. Here are the top 3 graphics that he attached. Would you like to send that? Or similar example, at this point in the cycle, John Smith would generally send out a relationship building activity. Would you like to go to lunch, dinner, or a ball game with this prospect? But when you think about that, that's the AI technology model of go sit next to the top producer in the office and shadow that person. But it's so much more effective than that, because it's not only confined to just your one office or location that you're in. This can be the top producer in the entire company, and it's not just relying on you shadowing and memorizing and writing it down, but you're literally being prompted at each step of the way. And that extends past just behavioral issues, which we're talking about now, and into writing an email. Like the top producer would traditionally say this more specifically, or whatever you wanted to say to get the point across, but having that AI guided training on how to be the best and how to excel within your profession and your company, I think will unlock massive amounts of potential for a lot of people.
I have this reservation in general about some of these tools. And at the first meeting we had here, at our first, not meeting, but cut, I had some of these reservations about some of these technologies. In the first recording that we had here at Chai, I was thinking about some of these reservations, but then again, our conversation is not on the alarmist side, but rather on the positive side. And the reason I'm saying this, the first thing that I said there was that we can talk about these problems and reservations because we get to do that, because we now have the breathing space to do that. Previously, if the organization was 100,000 people, it wasn't possible to judge or review some parts of the organization. But now you have a tool that is trained on it, is always awake and sharp, and it doesn't have a mood today and tomorrow. It doesn't have the limitations. Of course, at the same time, we have the other side of the whole other side of the spectrum, which is, where does this machine learning model, or where does this AI learn its craft from? So if it is learning from a data that has biases in, or prehistoric biases, like historical biases in it, because the organization had unknowingly, or without their necessary sorry, unknowingly they did this biases in their organization, the same will apply in the AI, and it will ensure that those will stay the way they are.
I want to take
But
a view here that might be both alarmist and optimist at the same time. There's definitely a conversation about bias in the data, and potentially even bias in the model. And I'm not talking about the technical bias of a neural network, but just bias around, behavior and people and characteristics and diversity. I want to argue this point. Humans are pretty biased. We all have a fair amount of biases that are in us already. Is the AI more biased than the average human, or are humans more biased than AI? And couldn't an AI solve for its bias? While as a human, it's very difficult to solve for our biases.
that's a very, very good point. That's what I wanted to talk about exactly. You see, you can fix an AI bias by putting it against another AI. So we talked about generative adversarial networks. We talked about GANs. We can put one network against another one, which is, its job is to prevent bias. So you train a network that its job is to unbias a data set, unprejudice a data set. So now you have a model that learned how to communicate within your organization, meaning language, meaning culture, meaning anything. And then now you pit it against this other network to train itself while keeping your culture intact, while keeping your method of training, your method of knowledge management, everything intact, at the same time, prevent prejudices.
But Nima, I want to go to something you said in a previous episode that I loved and has really stuck with me. And it's this concept of, when an AI hallucinates, it's just trying to give you the answer you want, right? Because it gets more candy that way, right? And in this same instance, I wonder, is AI going to potentially learn that the true outcome that it's trying to achieve is more important to it and to us than the bias that we're telling it to ignore? Could it, and maybe I'm on the alarmist side of things, Richie, but what is going to stop AI from seeking that candy in this instance? That, to me, is just one of those unanswered, cool technical questions.
I think we need to do an entire episode on adversarial networks. GANs are really interesting arrangements of artificial intelligence where two networks will debate with each other around a particular thesis. And then the question is, who's governing the governing network, right? Who's policing the police, so to speak. I want to go back to Dustin. Another stage in HR is performance and performance reviews. With the ability now to process so much information and at the same time extract meaning from so much information, what does automated performance management look like, and what are some of the pros cons around it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, it's going to increase the amount of data that's immediately at your fingertips, right? I think that you will be able to get somebody's quarterly and annual deep dive metrics in a very succinct type reporting with an AI LLM than you would with any of the tools that we're currently using. So I think that brings an entirely new element to it. I haven't given a ton of thought to this particular line of questioning, but I think it will be interesting to see how you can manage more of the emotional side and the person's motivators, their goals, their desires, their visions, when you will have all of the hard data so easily captured, right? Because right now, with the limited amount of time, we have to spend a lot of time on collecting the actual data. Once it's collected for you almost instantly, then I think you can focus more on some of those abstract features. And really that piece, in my opinion, is how you go out and get top performers to work for your organization. They have to understand the vision and the goal of a company and everything that you are doing, but also you have to understand what's important to them. Is it compensation? Is it promotions within the organization? Is it building something incredibly special, curing cancer or disrupting the health insurance status quo? Whatever that why is to that person. And I think once you have the data, the hard data, the performance data readily available, you can focus more time on some of those larger emotional items as well.
And mentorship. So a big part of what happens in an organization is to match you to a mentor. I think matching is a lot more precise now.
Yeah, matching is more precise, and just sort of building an arc from what Dustin just talked about, this concept of the emotional things. Mentorship and sponsorship in an organization often go hand in hand. And if you have a sponsor, your career can go in a very different place than if you don't. Same with mentors, right?
What about an AI as a sponsor?
Well, so this is what I was thinking. I was thinking through this and thinking, sometimes organizations start to use technology to try and pull that emotion out. And this certainly gives us an opportunity to start to think about that. So mentor matching, that sort of already happens in organizations now with technology and other things. But this concept of having an AI mentor or AI sponsor, somebody who is truly seeing you through the organization and taking a human out of it, for some people, that's going to really level the playing field. A lot of deals are still done in dark, smoky rooms to get people in the C-suite. And again, I know that's sort of a negative perspective on the world, but this is one of those places, this concept of where does true performance lie versus where does the interpretation of performance. And by the way, you could be an expert, top performer and still not be a cultural fit, still be disruptive to your organization, still need to go express your talents in other places. And so we can't fully just look at the sort of meritocracy of the situation and take emotion completely out of it. So, right now we have mentors and sponsors who can, for good or for bad, intervene. And I'm not sure what would happen if we shift to an AI only sponsor, and how that would work and what that would do.
Yeah, I want to change the conversation for a second and move to this diagram that we have here. So my thoughts have always been that the nature of work is going to change. Much like how we went from manual workers over here to knowledge workers, where the motor commoditized labor work and the computer introduced information sharing, we're going to move from knowledge workers to what I've termed visionary workers. These are people who operate not in information mediums, but imaginative mediums, because a lot of the information exchange and processing of knowledge work is potentially going to be commoditized. Visionary workers are interesting in that they ought to be more creative, they ought to be more expressive, etc. The thing that I find interesting here is that sometimes the most creative people are the quietest. They send less emails, they do less Slack messages, right? They do less text, they talk less in meetings. Creativity and quiet folks tend to go hand in hand. There's a bias here to people who share, people who talk, people who text, people who send longer emails, because more information about them is loaded up into the performance systems. More information about them is loaded up into the sponsorship and the mentorship systems. We're going to have to deal with people who don't share that much information, and that in itself is a bias now.
I agree with you, and there is we can put it in the show notes, but there is a term for what I'm trying to think of, but there's a method that works to ultimately highlight this and prevent against it. So essentially, if the loudest person in the meeting or the person that writes the most elegant, long worded email is the one that gets what they want, that creates a huge bias. Obviously, I think most people can relate to that with somebody who's the loudest person in the meeting. But what the method is where you get feedback. It takes 8 minutes or 10 minutes or 8 minutes or 10 hours, I forget exactly what it is, to collect all the feedback, and then the feedback is presented anonymously to the CEO, to the decision maker, so that everybody gets their chance to put the best answer. It doesn't have a bias for the person that's witty and think quickly on their feet, or the creative, quiet person who isn't comfortable speaking up, but then you can get to the best answer. Obviously, be a better answer on my end if I can think of that method, but I'm sure with a quick Google search we can find it. But that's super interesting topic to dive down.
We'll find that and put it in the comments. Nima, we've talked a little bit here, and we've talked a little bit about data mastery. We haven't talked that much about model maturity, and we've definitely talked about cultural readiness. From a model maturity standpoint, Nima, large language models, fantastic. Are there specific subsets of models or specific sub-sciences or categories of networks that are more likely to benefit HR, training, mentoring, performance review, onboarding than others? Is there sort of a science and a cluster developing here?
Yeah, and thank you for that. I wanted to talk about one subject, and this is a very good segue to that. You see, human resources in general and human studies on behavior patterns and stuff, and in that category, when you think about it, they have been a theory on a data that we had, and then we theorized, we examined, and so on and so forth. But imagine you have better data now. Imagine you have data that you could put in a unsupervised network and let it cluster the data in a way that you couldn't have imagined. There is this book, Everybody Lies, or I'm not very sure. We will search and put it in the comment section, where it talks about how people search the truth and talks about the data doesn't lie. It is a good book. I suggest reading it. But anyways, what I want to say is that it is going to change in general the whole concept of human resources and human studies and behavior patterns, because now we will have better data, not necessarily more data, but rather better data, relationship between data points that we couldn't figure out and can be figured out now, connect them to performance, connect them to better results. And that is the benefit of AI and machine learning models and data collection and model maturity in this domain.
Fantastic. Now, we're having a conversation about human resources, and it's no question that AI is going to augment humans. And so I would leave a challenge to the three individuals here now. Imagine if we were to go from, human resources to AI resources. I mean, if AI is going to augment humans, we're going to need some resources for the artificial intelligences. What are some of the things that are going to get invented in the future? Some of the best practices and changes in business models. And you can't be wrong here. We're just dreaming about what I would loosely call, and I hope this doesn't become a reality, AI resources.
Richie, why don't you go first?
So I think, look, so first of all, retraining, right? Models based on how the world changes, how culture changes, how reality changes, how market changes. You could have the market or the environment shift away from the rules and the weights of a model. Humans, by nature, we will observe and learn and fine tune on the fly, almost like a liquid network, right? You'll know that the market's not doing that well. You'll know that today was a rainy day. You'll know that there was war in the world over the last 3 months, and so you may behave differently. But an AI sort of has this fixed state, and it may not have all these signals from the external environment to really read the room, so to speak. And so sort of model maintenance, if I may, right? Or sort of situational awareness, fine tuning are the types of things that I would see in HR resources. That I would see in AI resources.
I think we will get to a point where you mentioned it, the creativity will become the coin. Creativity becomes the value. We will have all sort of AIs doing all sort of recurrent, constant and common tasks, and then human beings with their ability to work on creative sides. Therefore, we will have less of grunt work and more of creative works, which I think it would change the nature of hiring, motivating, and of course, interview in general, the whole process from beginning to end.
Ange, I want to pass this one off to you. So in the past, maybe 50, 60 years, we've measured skill from the perspective of certification, right? Experience or certification. If we're going into a world where creativity is sort of the skill in demand, how do you represent creativity in a resume?
Well, I don't know how you represent creativity in a resume, but I do think that we are going to hit a point where models will have to be strung together in this concept of AI resources that you're talking about. If you think about the way that we're going to solve problems with AI, it's not going to be just convolutional network. It's not going to just be a graph network. It's going to be a combination of different signals from different places that rely on one another to create something new. And the interesting thing about that is the creativity and how do you represent that. I think the way we're going to represent creativity in the future is going back to your concept of going from knowledge worker to vision worker. And to me, the only way that you measure vision is in outcomes, true, tangible, value-based outcomes. So I would say we're going to, right now you say, I've closed X deal, for X billion dollars. I've done, managed 800 people. I have a big P&L under my guide. You say stuff like that. That kind of outcome is not going to matter anymore. That's just going to be data. What people are going to be looking for is how did you translate something into a value-based outcome that's so beyond what we think of as an outcome right now.
Yep. Dustin, I'll give you closing statements here. Dustin, I know you've got young kids. I think our kids are around the same age. My 5.5-year-old has been actively engaging with the large language model the last couple of days. As a matter of fact, I've had to start to put some screen time management on him with the large language model. By the time he's 21, he would have spent 16 years with a model that would know him pretty well, could engage like him, I think. And in some ways, he could have trained that model to do many of the things that he's good at. There's a version of this where my model can go to work on my behalf. What are your thoughts on that? Probability of when you think it'll happen, and what does that mean to society?
So a couple things to wrap everything together. But I think that one of the things that we'll see is the resurgence and the prevalence of a chief automation officer. And that person would be responsible for judgment. So going back to the earlier conversation you and Angela were having of, do we have an AI mentor? Do we have a personal mentor? And all of the things that we may need, reasons, pros and cons for that. But judgment will be critical as what we want to automate and what we don't. I think more on a micro level of doing the actual job and and being able to become great at it. When you think about it just from a sales or business development perspective, right now, the traditional salesperson is spending a majority of their time prospecting, setting new meetings, and following up with the prospect. These are things that AI can already do well now and can certainly do much better in the future. The actual sales, the presentation, the understanding of a client's needs compared to what your company offers as a product or service and how to match that, that's a key part of making any large transaction or any sale, but it actually doesn't take a lot of the time. So once you can automate away the biz dev, the setting the meeting, the following up with the prospect, who knows what the person does for the extra time? I mean, maybe they're doubling the amount of revenue in half the time. Maybe they take that time to work 30 hours instead of 50 hours, go play golf, go spend time with their kids. Maybe we can get that much more done, both for the business and for ourselves with much less time in the day. That's at least my optimistic hope for all of this.
Fantastic. Well, I want to wrap us. I'm going to clear the light board here and bring this to a close. I want to thank you, Ange, for joining here. Nima, thank you for your thoughts and keeping us balanced. Dustin, thank you for joining Chai. I have a feeling we're going to have this HR conversation again. I'd love to have this HR conversation again in a couple of quarters. AI is a 10K marathon. We're at about the 300-meter yard. There's going to be a lot of changes. Most of us don't necessarily know everything that's going to happen. A few of us believe we do, and that's the old Socrates-Plato sort of dichotomy playing itself out. So these discussions are really important, and they're going to help us kind of find our way in the midst of both opportunity and uncertainty at the same time. This show is called Chai. Thank you for your time. We're out.